as we get started here. Let's see. All right. Excellent. Okay. So we have begun recording. So thank you again, everyone. My name is Justin Nordhorn, Director of Policy and External Affairs for Liquor and Cannabis Board, and we're going to be covering retail alcohol product placement regulations this morning. And so we're really we're going to be doing two different sessions, one today from 10 a.m. to noon, and then another one this Thursday from 1 to 3. They're going to be the exact same. We're not going to be making any changes to any of the draft language that we've kind of put together thus far for the Thursday meeting. So again, everything will be the exact same. People can attend both if they would like to. But just letting folks know that there won't be anything different shared by the LCB on Thursday. We could get some different feedback from stakeholders, though, on that day. All right. So basically, what we're trying to do here, we're at the very preliminary stages of rule development around alcohol product placement, and we'd like to start getting additional feedback. We've had some meetings already with stakeholder groups who've reached out, wanted to kind of have some preliminary conversations. What we're doing today is really throwing out a draft concept, if you will. It's very rough. This is not a new rule set that's at the CR 102 phase for actual draft language, but we do have the draft language available to look at, which will cover all the different sections today. But when folks are looking at that, this isn't anything that's in place. It's a starting point, and we're definitely open for a lot of feedback. And I'll cover a little bit of feedback that we have received thus far as we get into some of these slides. So that is kind of the plan for today. If you have any questions after the or feedback after the presentation is done, please contact us at rules@lcb.wa.gov. We'll be able to either collect your comments or answer questions. All right, so for the meeting today, again, it's being recorded. Some of the team features will be on, but written questions submitted in the chat, they're going to be saved in our rulemaking files. So please keep in mind that the chat feature on today's meeting is all public record. We are also potentially not able to respond to comments in real time in the chat, but I'll try to do my best in keeping up to speed on what the questions are, and then we'll integrate those and have time for questions also at the end. So everybody will be muted, and you'll only be unmuted when the session enables their microphones. So Tierney's helping me out today with that feature. And to ask questions during the session, we'd ask you to raise your hand, and then that way we'll be able to identify folks with the questions, and then Tierney can select the unmute so you'll be able to get on. And so if you'd like to submit questions again after the session is over, feel free to do so, rules@lcb.wa.gov. So kind of where we're at right now is we started the concept in January where we filed our CR 101. And basically what that is saying we're going to be doing rulemaking on product placement. And so that's just a preliminary information. Up to that point, we had received a lot of comments from community members, parents, grandparents of youth, and expressing concerns around alcohol product placement, exposure issues, ease of theft, having the underage folks be able to access some of these products. Particularly with some of these crossover products that we're seeing, where you have a regular standard soda and then they've created a spiked version, if you will, or a hard version of that. And so we're trying to address, how this is interacting in our stores today, so we can try to alleviate those concerns. So we're just really at this preliminary stage, as you can see on the screen, and we're going to take the feedback that we received this week, build it into the draft, and then we'll probably have a second round of stakeholder engagement in April. If there are no suggestions, then we may not need to do that. But I don't think that that'll be the case. So we're planning on a secondary round of engagement in April. Once we file the CR 102, which will be in May, those are the actual draft proposed rules, and that'll start a formal public comment period. So there'll be continuing public comment throughout this process. And during that particular time period between the CR 102 being filed and the public hearing, we're not changing any of the rules or regulations that have been presented because we have to get all the feedback on those. So what we're trying to do beforehand is get a rule set to a place where we believe it's meeting interests of a number of folks before we can file that CR 102, because then we're going to be kind of in a holding pattern until the public hearing. And then if we don't get any additional comments during the public comment period and the hearing, then the CR 103 gets filed, which is an adoption of the proposed rules. So we've got three main goals today. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So reducing the exposure and access to youth, the confusion between the alcohol and non-alcohol products that are similar in nature and crossover, and also reducing some theft issues. So as you're looking at the presentation, which will be posted online afterwards, there are a number of resources. We've done a letter to the industry. We've also have a research brief that's available on our website. There's been some out-of-state correspondence that we have looked at. And so I will also drop all of those links into the chat. So if you're interested in seeing those, they'll be there. And then they're also, the presentation will be online. So our product placement rules are also online. And so if you're looking at the proposed language, you can go through this particular link that I'm putting in secondly, and that'll bring you to our alcohol rulemaking page for the alcohol product placement. And then you can see the draft proposed rules. So if you don't have those and you're interested in seeing those are also available to you at this point. Okay, so what we want to do is kind of cover, excuse me, cover all the sections in this particular draft. And as we go through, we're going to hopefully gather some feedback on what might work, what might not work. And please keep in mind, we are very open to feedback and making changes. This is all preliminary. We put this draft together so that we have a starting point for conversation. Instead of just putting out the topic for some discussion, we felt we usually get a little bit more responses and feedback if there's actual language that has been contemplated. But again, this is super preliminary, so please keep that in mind. And any suggestions, please feel free to make. You can do that in writing afterwards. You can put them in the chat. And we'll be capturing all that feedback as we continue to go through. So when we're looking at the particular alcohol product placement rules, we identified predominantly the off-premise locations here. So these are going to be your beer and wine specialty shops, spirits, beer and wine retailers, specialty shops, grocery stores, the combination beer and wine grocery stores, and then your dedicated spirit retailers. And all of those licenses would be impacted by this, but we do recognize that not all of those licenses can be approached the same when it comes to some of these regulations. And so that's one of the things that we need to be able to identify, and that will make some sense as we walk through this. And so when we're looking at what are some of the license restrictions, we're recognizing that these different sizes of businesses are going to need two different sets of rules. So what we're looking at here is the large scale grocers that have quite a bit of room. There's a lot of different opportunities to place sets out on the floor versus your smaller convenience stores that are 2,500 square feet or less is kind of our starting point. That doesn't necessarily mean that needs to be the cutoff threshold. But we did take a look at Illinois on the proposed rules, and they have a 2,500 square foot as the dividing line. So we thought that's a good starting point for us. But again, we want to make sure that we're taking a look at those particular areas of interest as well. And then, of course, those who have over 2,500 square feet are going to have slightly different regulations. And so no liquor products containing 0.5% alcohol, so basically anything that's deemed alcohol, cannot be in the same aisle or displayed next to their non-alcoholic counterparts or non-alcohol products as defined in the section. And then I will open this up for comments in just a moment as I go through these exceptions. So basically what we're looking at is any products that are advertised or labeled as non-alcoholic beer, wine, or spirits. We recognize those are typically displayed and set in the alcohol, dedicated alcohol spaces of stores. And so we're not trying to move those or have those be moved anywhere. They can still remain in that area. Non-flavored bottled water. A lot of times people would like to have access to water. We don't want water to be only available in alcohol space, but we're trying to create a little bit of separation with flavored beverages and that sort of thing from the alcohol products. Products commonly known as mixers, of course, can still be in the alcohol space, as well as bitters. And then cooking wine, of course, which isn't something for consumption, but we recognize that somebody's going to ask about that because it is basically a salted wine specifically designed for cooking and not consumption, so that can stay in the general food aisles. So the non-alcohol products that we're talking about are soft drinks, sodas, fruit juices, energy drinks, liquid teas, any of the flavored water, and then also toys, games, and candy, snack food with cartoons, and then any item that's really marketed for child consumption. So I am going to go through a couple pictures and then open this up for feedback on this first section. And so all of these pictures that we have in the presentation today have been taken in Washington State. They've been shared by community members, public health prevention, families, even some of our staff when they've been doing checks have identified some of these types of product displays that have created some concern. And so when we're looking at these products and displays, we want people to be asking if anything is missing from that previous list. So let me go back to that. So any of the non-alcohol products, if there's something missing, we'd like to know that, or if anything should be characterized differently. And so when we're looking at these types of things, you're seeing, like on the left, you've got candy next to some spirits. You have the hard soft drink, if you will, the crossover product right next to Kool-Aid, which is generally marketed to kids. You have frozen popsicles next to frozen cocktails, that sort of thing. And then you've got wine next to the candies, and you've got ready to drink cocktails next to the child snacks. And so this is some of the stuff that people are really concerned about seeing. And so when we're looking at crossover alcohol next to candy, as we see Barbie here with the hard beverages right behind that, has raised some concerns. So I'm going to stop. I guess I'll go through a few more of the pictures before we open it up for dialogue here. So just to touch base on the toy issues. So we've got Hot Wheels right next to the alcohol. We've got ping pong balls in the alcohol aisle. Those types of things are promoting overconsumption. And so the toys really should not necessarily be in the alcohol aisles, what we're proposing. And then we also have like the Hot Wheels right above the alcohol. And then as you can see here, we've got a number of different types of things at the end caps that are just right off of the candy displays, as well as in your refrigerated sections. So something else that some folks have brought up is having things like the bags that you see above the alcohol, the bags are geared predominantly towards a youth. And so how that's marketed with alcohol has been raised as a concern. And then, of course, the end cap's right next to the candy aisle again. So let's go ahead and stop there so we can open up some dialogue on that first section. And I'm happy to back up any of the slides, whether it's a picture or the definitions, and see kind of what are people thinking right now. And I will put another caveat on here that we recognize that some of the rules as they are currently drafted, oops, let's go back. Some of the rules that are how they're currently drafted are not going to necessarily work for a dedicated specialty shop. And so when you're looking at somebody who only sells alcohol, we have not built that into this particular draft, but we recognize that those modifications are going to be needed in order to make something work. And so please keep that in mind. And if you have any other suggestions, we can certainly go through that. So we had a request to move back into where the restrictions are. And so this is kind of the general restriction. And then here are the exceptions around some of that product placement. We'll get into other of the requirements in some later slides too, but when you're looking at these exceptions or you're looking at these types of non-alcohol products, any particular reaction from folks. And feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to talk, or you can put something in chat. So we've got something in the chat. It says, has it been suggested that product placement rules not apply to stores where spirits, wine, and beer are sold only in a restricted space that is 21 and over? That concept has come up. We don't currently have any areas that are classified by the board as off limits to persons under 21 in these types of businesses. Some businesses will self-restrict and regulate. But we wouldn't consider that a store that's off limits to 21 based on regulation. And so that's a concept that we could certainly explore, that if a store wanted to be 21 and over, how would that relate to some of these regulations, or would we need to have that for 21 plus stores? But keep in mind that we also do have concerns about product confusion because we've heard a lot of that around some of those crossover products. And so how do we identify and make sure that the consumer, even of legal age, understands what they're purchasing when lookalike products are right next to each other? So there's a suggestion adding literature, books and magazines targeted to youth be included. There's been observations of alcohol next to small books that include children's books and magazines. So we can make a note of that for consideration. And so these are the types of suggestions that are good for us to be thinking about. We have thought about that going back to the age 21 and over. We've talked to some businesses that do self-restriction, and so they may not have an interest in becoming fully 21 and over based on a board regulation or restriction. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, well, what would that look like in those types of stores where you have some of the crossover products and the like. And we'll get into some of the other types of product placement that we're concerned about. But from the non-alcohol products or the base restrictions, any other comments or feedback, whether in chat or raising your hand? Right, so we have something, someone commenting on limiting opportunities for suppliers with less access who rely on LTO, cross-merchandising and store-to-store selling to get their products placed. Currently, many of our states, apple farms are losing money and turning to selling cider in local stores to keep their farms afloat. So appreciate that comment. Any concerns about pharmaceutical products that contain alcohol? No, so that could be that's something I shouldn't say no, but we haven't talked about that. That hasn't come into consideration. That hasn't been something that people have presented as a concern, and so that might be appropriate to put into the exceptions if folks are um, concerned about that. Uh, Many sodas are commonly used as mixers. Could those still be sold near alcohol? So the initial thoughts around this are keeping those sodas separate because that's really where the confusion comes in. And we want to make sure that one, the consumer is fully aware of what they're purchasing, and if the sodas are right next to the alcohol, there is some youth exposure and access and what's influencing the behaviors of youth in their purchasing. And so there is some strong concern around having those products next to each other. And so as we're thinking about particularly the store size, we really have to think about what that looks like also in those small convenience stores because they don't have the same type of layout and spaces set. So those are some of the things that need to come into consideration. Um, Another comment is the restrictions that are proposed in the draft make it difficult for stores with open floor plans or who provide multiple POS locations within the store for customers. So we can certainly take a look at that. If you have some specifics that you could provide as examples, you can email us at rules inbox if you don't want to put those in the chat. But we're happy to consider again the different types of layouts. This is just the starting point, and we really want to make sure that we're getting as much feedback as we can on these. So one of the things, there's a question here, do you actually have any data concerning product placement to increase youth access or just concerns that have been raised? We did put together a research brief, so I would encourage folks to take a look at that. It's part of the links that I put at the very beginning of the chat. Um, but we do have a lot of youth that have some impressions, and we recognize that stores don't necessarily have ill intent. However, last year we had a fatal tragedy with a 16-year-old, and they were in a single car crash. The other 16-year-olds that were in the car, when talking to the grandparents, had indicated that the store leaves these displays out so we can steal a product. Now, of course, that's not what stores set out there, but when it's easy to access in that manner, and that's what the perception is, regardless of what the intent is from the store, that raises some concerns, and that could have potentially been prevented through some better product placement. When we've talked to some locations in the state about changing some of the sets in the layout that have presented concern, responses have included that the store manager is not able to do that because of the corporation out of state will not let them change anything. And so it's come to our attention that if the state would like to have some changes made, then regulations are going to be needed in this. And this is something that we've had a lot of interest in, not only from the community, but the board members as well. So we're really trying to evaluate this particular dynamic and try to see if we can figure out a solution to make it work for stores as well as reducing those risks that we've identified. Let's see, okay, so how does this impact liquor placement at a gas station? That's one of the things that I was discussing on the small convenience stores. And I think when you're looking at the stores having stuff like the buzz balls, small bottles of liquor right at the checkout stand, that would be something at this particular point. I would say that we have an interest in reducing or eliminating that at the point of checkout. And so that would be something that needs to be discussed, but that's something that's been of concern. For products that pair with spirits, mixers, and colas, could the rules be similar to non-flavored water, such that the placement these products with alcohol, like Coke next to the Jack Daniels, is permitted so long as it's not the only placement of those products. So again, any of these questions and feedback we'll take into consideration. So I can't give you an answer one way or the other, but we can certainly take that back as a point of interest. The rules seem like a broad response to alcohol, alcoholic sodas, wines, and other beverages not branded as alcohol sodas and should not be impacted. Okay, so other comments of this at this point? I will move into, we have merchandising during cultural and other holidays and events are impacted as well by these rules. Yeah, and we recognize some of the particular around holiday events that have raised concerns that we don't have specifically in this or pictures is stuff like, quite frankly, hard eggnog, right around the puddings and the dairy stuff, particularly if it's in areas that are geared towards youth type of consumption. Imported alcoholic drinks also create a unique problem. Many of the alcohol drinks that are placed near sushi and delis are located in stores are in local stores, apologize, are in bottles packaged that look like fruit juices, and alcohol content is very small print. Sushi isn't specific to youth, however, the packaging is problematic. This may be a packaging concern rather than a placement concern. And one of the things that we talked about kind of along those lines in a manner of speaking is a concept which we don't have fully in here is would signage around alcohol versus a non-alcohol help mitigate these concerns that are being presented. So that would be a point of consideration that we would also like to get some feedback on. So moving into the next section, the liquor products must not be displayed within view of any point of sale or checkout. Now, we recognize this is going to be very different between a very large grocer and a small convenience store because everything is within view of the checkout in a small convenience store. So one of the things here is the impulse buying as well as impulse of picking up these small containers and potentially stealing those from the store. And so by removing those from the front end of the stores, there's an interest that would help mitigate the risks in that particular area. So when we're seeing some of these, particularly around stuff like mini bottles, that are easily pocketed or the buzz balls. You'll see these freestanding displays. Don't have a lot of folks paying attention to them, and things can be easily taken from there. One of the things that we did discuss, kind of going back to the comment around data, that we discussed with some of the stakeholders that reached out before this particular session, was around theft rates and shrink rates of alcohol products. So folks do have data that they're willing to share for their type of business or their stores or their company around their shrink rates compared to other products in the store. We'd certainly be happy to take the data and have that as a part of the consideration for deliberation as we start looking at these. But here's the where those concerns kind of come. And then on the end caps and freestanding displays, we're not trying to take that aside from the alcohol aisle, but when we have those at the end caps of throughout the store and the freestanding displays that are right around the children's type of products that are aimed to youth, that creates a considerable concern. And so that's one of the things that we've been thinking about is how do we lessen that. And so the liquor products would have to be displayed or could not be displayed on the end caps or the freestanding displays unless it's in the broader area of the that's dedicated to the alcohol sales. Let me jump back into the comments. Okay, so we have anti-theft measures make it advisable to see the entire store from the POS so that the cashier can monitor customer behavior. For businesses that specialize in liquor sales, that means that all spirits will be placed within view of the point of sale. And we heard that from another stakeholder as well. We've actually uh, talked about, the security of some of those small, attractive type of items that are easily to steal or that are easy to steal, um, and concepts of, maybe having them locked up came up in conversation. We understand people are potentially moving away from locking up products. But as we were thinking about some of these, that idea came up as cosmetics and razors and a number of other things are frequently observed as being locked up. The question is why couldn't we have something that has a greater direct impact to public safety be locked up? And so that would be one of the things for consideration. The it would make all right. So we have some. Somebody put some data in that responsibility.org shows that alcohol consumption among 20 or 12 to 20-year-olds declined 6% in the last couple of years without changing store sets. So that could be something to look at. So for stores concerned about shoplifting, there's a way to reduce theft. If you see an underage shopper in the alcohol area, it would alert store staff. Current placement all over the store may make it easier for youth to take alcohol without being noticed. And that's where we were thinking about having a more dedicated approach. So, and I'll get to Josh, your question in just a second. I'll cover a couple more of these. Stores have multiple POS throughout the store, not just at the point of sale, or I'm sorry, not just at the front. So comments can be in the chat. I'm going to open up, and since I'm at your question here, Josh, in the chat, I'll open it up to you. So Tierney, if you can unmute Josh, and go ahead, Josh. You can ask your question in the open forum if you'd like.
Josh, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Justin, you hear me all right?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to get to hear this and then have our opportunity to voice our concerns and questions and so forth. So on this specific section on the end caps and freestanding displays, I'm happy to share with your team and the board. We have the washing and wine industry. We have 2 washing and wine months a year, which happy washing and wine month in March, which is happening now, as well as August. And these opportunities to be able to have end caps or freestanding displays, I think is a tremendously important, like incredibly valuable, important part for your local wine industry to stand out from the thousands of other wines that come around the world that we have to try to compete with. And I have decades of pictures that I'm happy to share with your team. These are done very tastefully. They're really, I think, they're impressive, and also done appropriately. And I would say, something that really is not the target or concern here. I mean, I hear what you're saying around these certain types of products. Smaller, easier to grab. I would argue that a 750 milliliter wine bottle is incredibly difficult to that's not really the target. And I would imagine if data would likely back that up. So we would like to work with you on all of these, but this one has us incredibly concerned because these freestanding displays and caps are so important to your local small wineries that are in the grocery stores and these stores that are trying to stand out. And and get the attention. And they also, wine is, it comes from vines, and we're from the ground. We're, in some degree food, and work with food. We want people to enjoy their local wine with food. And so there's a lot of these freestanding displays that are also, have food around them. Of course, not candy, that's not the things that we put around them, right? It's aisles with whether it's local salmon or other local products, or just products generally that you would pair your wine with. So we're very concerned about this one, if so broad that it would impact our ability to be able to do these in a way that we've been doing for very long, so that we can market our local wine industry in these grocery stores. So just want to get that on your radar and your team's radar, the importance here of this specific one. But and there are other parts of the rules that we have concerns, and we want to make sure we're voicing them to you as well. And looking forward to working with you on all of these. So thank you for the chance to talk about this one specifically.
Absolutely. Thanks for the feedback. And again, nothing's set in stone. We're open to all feedback at this point. And I see another comment that talks about, what's the connection between the restrictions and end caps and the goal for theft reduction. So the end cap piece is also having to do with setting up displays right next to the candy aisles, the toys, and those types of things. And we see that combination, uh, fairly frequently with the end caps. And so I think that the theft issues around some of the freestanding and end cap displays with those small items is one issue, and then the crossover products and then how it's marketed around products geared to youth is another part of that equation. So, Crystal, I see your hand is raised, so let's unmute Crystal and hear from you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much again for hosting this open stakeholder forum. And I'm with the Washington Retail Association, so we really do want to work with you and appreciate your willingness to just be collaborative on this process. I do want to just echo some of Josh's concerns as well as regarding end caps and merchandising. A lot of our members, again, they may place, a bottle of wine near, cheese because, it's part of the accoutrement. If it's a holiday event, you may see certain types of chocolates paired with wine for Valentine's Day. So I do want to just raise that is a concern for many of our members, and happy and looking forward to being able to work with you. We will send in comments. I would like the opportunity to be able to have maybe more robust discussion about how we can help address a lot of the concerns, because many of my members who provided feedback, we don't disagree that, if it's a hard soda, something that looks similar to, a regular, Coca-Cola, but then it's a hard Coca-Cola, like they shouldn't be paired next to each other. But if it's something very clear, part of a merchandising aspect, that shouldn't be, hopefully we can find a appropriate language and approach to making sure that that's not impacted, while ensuring that youth access is, the concern around youth access is limited and mitigated through this process.
Excellent. Thanks for that feedback. And again, I'll stress that these are really preliminary drafts, and so we're definitely open to all feedback. And I think one of the things that as we go through this, or even afterwards, we're going to hear obviously a lot of concerns today from folks around some of these preliminary concepts. But the other thing that would be helpful for us to hear with regard to some of these initial concepts is what sounds workable as well. And that doesn't need to be, necessarily shared in the meeting today if you're not prepared for that. But as you're thinking about what the challenges are, if there's anything that can work towards this, and we do see this kind of coming up in other states. This is becoming a national issue, particularly for the crossover products. And we've seen legislation passed in some states and regulations in others. And so I think this is becoming a fairly broad issue. And so just something to keep in mind if you're looking at how those other states have their regulations drafted, like Illinois, as we put into the chat earlier. If there's something that you see in that sounds reasonable and workable, then that would be good for us to get comments on as well. Right. So just on the freestanding type of end caps and displays. So as you can see, we've got the hard beverages right there on the end cap next to the soft drinks and the bottled water. And so that's kind of what we're talking about when it comes to that. This isn't necessarily a theft concern right here, but this is that marketing and youth crossover kind of concern. Um, yeah, so I will reshare the links again at the very end of the presentation. And that way folks can have it. If you saw it at the beginning, if you scroll up in the chat, you might be able to get to those, and I'll repost those at the end. So thank you for that. All right, so some other examples where we're seeing some of the products on the end caps. And one of the things that I think we need to be thinking about in relation to end caps and product placement are things like the cooler, right? So how does that play into some of the store layouts? Because those aren't going to be something that we can necessarily or I'm sorry, it's not necessarily something a store can actually move. And so how do we work around some of that kind of thing? Um, uh, Getting feedback on that will be really helpful as well. Monitored. And so really getting some feedback around what these look like, because the minis that we're talking about would be less than the 200 milliliters. So that would be things like the mini bottles of spirits and the buzz balls, those types of things that are that size that are easily picked up, pocketed, and for the theft issues. So these are all smaller than cans of pop. So it's fairly small type of item that can be picked up. So what do we mean by reasonably secured? Initially, our thoughts around this is the individual theft prevention devices. Obviously, with those really small bottles, that's not necessarily as possible. So we're trying to figure out what that might look like, secured behind the counter in a locked cabinet. In a manner that's out of the reach of shoppers. So it doesn't necessarily need to be locked, but shoppers can't just access it. Maybe an employee gets it for the shopper. And so those types of things would fall under that reasonably secured. And so when we look at some of the areas of concern, we've got, the Jack Daniels display right, at the end, up by the check stands. It's at the end of the uh, uh, soda aisle with soda, and just easily accessed out of those small bins. Same thing with the small bins on just the countertop, and then of course, which you can see in the Buzzball cocktail kind of open tray. Those are all part of that theft consideration and concept. So when we're thinking about some of these, how does that look? And it's from a regulatory standpoint. When we see pictures like the one that's on the right, where you have a whole bunch of product that's locked up, including cigarettes in the back, but we have freestanding alcohol right on the counter. That type of thing is presenting some concerns around this type of youth access and alcohol sales. So again, just a couple more pictures of these freestanding displays that have been presented to us for consideration. And so when we're looking at moving into the other part of the regulation on what could some of this look like in a store that's less than 2,500 square feet. And again, that might not be the appropriate threshold or cutoff. We're open to that, but as a starting point. So, anything that is an alcoholic beverage, it could be next to a non-alcoholic beverage for non-flavored type of bottled water, or many bottles of liquor would have to be reasonably secured still in these types of spaces. Um, And we'll need to talk to folks a little bit about the end cap concept in the small stores, because there may not be, how the floor sets are done. Um, what's workable, what's not. You've got the coolers, you've got the floor set aisles, and everything is fairly tight in those stores. So we're really looking at figuring out some solutions on how that could work to mitigate the risks that have been presented. Separating product is one of the concepts that we've been thinking about. So liquor products being physically separated from non-alcohol products. And keep in mind, we define the non-alcohol products with certain particular products. So it's not all non-alcohol products, but we have the non-alcohol products listed. That way you can have, some types of non-alcohol right next to the alcohol. So for example, if you were in a small convenience store and you have coolers that are stretching across, and you have, let's say, your dairy is in the middle of it, so it's non-alcoholic, it's liquid beverage, but that's not that point of concern. So maybe you have alcohol on one side and then sodas on the other side, that sort of thing. So just conceptual types of thoughts around that. And so when we're looking at other parts of separation, are kept visibly distinct portion of display from non-alcohol products. So um, that would be something, trying to create some natural separation so it's very clear. Um, so the concept of like the products being 3 feet off the floor was to potentially explore limited amount of cooler space. And so maybe the top half is alcohol where kids can't, it's not like eye level for kids, and the bottom half would be non-alcohol, something along those lines. And so that's kind of what that particular thought was in this part of the language. And then, of course, the signage. Would this be an option on having something that is very visible that the products contain alcohol, particularly when we're talking about some of those crossover type of products from that are the non-alcoholic products being marketed with basically the same brand, and then creating the alcohol product that looks like that. So let me open some conversation around the separation concepts and the smaller store concepts, and I'm happy to leave it on whichever page folks would like to think about. So Josh, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Sorry, took a second to mute. So Justin, so I understand, maybe I'm not fully understand the definitions here. When you say non-alcoholic products need to be like separated from non-alcoholic products, you're not talking about all food, all everything. You have a specific list that is, so like my example of putting a nice local wine next to a, fresh salmon, that might be still okay. Versus these products. Am I following correctly? You're not just saying like everything in the store that isn't alcohol? Can you
Yes,
correct me?
you're correct. And so just I'm just going to pause here for a second, just so I don't make people sick. I'm going to scroll up really fast to a previous slide so we can address what you're talking about. So hopefully people aren't caught off guard by um, so here's what we would be defining in this particular, or at least the concept right now is defining non-alcohol products as these items, specifically these items and nothing else. So it would be, here's the list of what we would consider the non-alcohol. So when you're talking about salmon and those types of things, it would not be within the scope of this particular list. And so we would ask people to kind of tie in those thoughts around this definition that we kind of thought about in these drafts. And so I hope that helps. But this is the list I'm talking about when we talk about non-alcoholic products.
Yeah, that helps. That helps. We originally was reading this as just, basically all food in the store. So, and then one other thing on the 3 foot off the floor, just as a comment from the washing wine industry, shelf space is incredibly difficult now. I don't know what that would do to the availability of shelf space if they had to change their wine aisle so that everything's at least 3 feet off the ground. Would have strong concerns over that. We already struggle to be able to get in those store shelves, and I get some of the concerns around it. But I guess I'm trying to I wonder if that covers everything in the store when you say 3 feet off the ground, or can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I'm going to scroll again, folks, so hopefully nobody gets sick. Um, so as we're looking at the separation, this is around the 3 foot. This is really for the 2,500 square foot and smaller locations. And so basically, what we're trying to figure out is if you have to share a cooler, for example, that you could have the alcohol on top and then non-alcohol on the bottom, so that it's not in the direct line of sight of the youth and those types of things. In the larger stores, this would not be one of the requirements for that 3 foot. And so it's really in an interest to say, what if we have to share cooler space essentially, and that's kind of where this concept is. And okay, again, we're going to have to kind of modify some of these types of concepts as we start thinking about what would work for businesses and what doesn't. But this is kind of where the starting point is. So the larger stores, if you're talking about those displays of wine, we're not expecting all displays to be 3 feet off the ground. This is in those more confined spaces where they're going to be shared with those non-alcoholic products. So if we have to have the combination of non-alcohol with the alcohol, what should that look like? And that's kind of the concept we're trying to explore.
Okay. Thank you. One final comment. I appreciate your hearing me out. A lot of what I've been reading from the links sent and from the letter last year and from everything else, it feels the concern is really focused more on a lot of the pictures that you're showing us and is around these certain types of products, crossover products that look like a soda when they're an alcohol product. Um, those kinds of things, or mini bottles of spirits or whatever. Um, is there every conversation with your team and with the LCB around focusing specifically in on those specific products versus generally and globally, capturing all alcohol in this type of rulemaking? I feel like similarly, we have several AIAs around the state, and they specifically have products that they're concerned about, right? And that's why those products are on those lists. Um, and so I don't just as a comment and a question to consider as we continue to have this discussion moving forward is if there's some interest or at least willingness to talk about where are the problem areas versus where are they not.
Certainly, yeah, and we're open to any of those discussions. I'm glad you actually brought up the AIAs, because that's kind of one of the things that we're struggling with this. And so we started by, okay, how do we want to define crossover products, et cetera, and really, focus in some of those. But of course, we also have the elements of those spirit mini bottles and the buzz balls and that type of a concern that's being raised around youth and their access. But one of the things that we see with the AIA type of criteria is manufacturers changing their products to not be right, meeting the specifics. So now we can sell something different because it's not on the list. So that's why just saying, hey, if it's an alcoholic product, this is where it's at. Again, this is a starting point, so we're definitely open to conversation, dialogue, and input around this. And this may not be where it ends, but at the same time, as the starting point, so we can kind of identify a lot of the issues. We just said anything that's 1/2 of 1% alcohol by volume and above would be impacted by these regulations. And so again, definitely open to feedback, and nothing is set in stone at this point.
All right, appreciate it. Well, we've given lots of feedback, so I look forward to talking about this further with you and your team.
Absolutely. So another question in the chat is, if the liquor is in a separate room or area, would it still need to be 3 feet? Again, this would be really focused on those smaller stores. And we wouldn't be expecting, for example, at least in the current concept, we wouldn't be expecting everything to be 3 feet off the floor. It was really to address space where you would have something else within the same display as as the alcohol. But you know, if folks wanted to have like a dedicated alcohol space and then there's less restrictions in that particular area, that's been a concept that has been raised and discussed a little bit. And we really need to understand what that's going to look like for the stores, and is that something people are interested in? So if there's, like the earlier question around age restricted stores, if that's all you sell is alcohol, that's definitely a concept we thought of. We also thought that most stores probably wouldn't want to go down that road. So we're starting from the point assuming that we wouldn't be doing that, but that's certainly a concept that could be considered throughout the course of this particular rule development. Other questions on separation of alcohol and the non-alcohol? Not seeing any new. Yeah, so again, the 3 feet off the floor language was dealing with shared displays, particularly in smaller stores, and it was uh, kind of a starting point on concepts of separating the different product. And so it's not something that, again, that we're fixated on. It was just a concept to generate these discussion points. So I don't have, is 3 feet the magic number? Could be more, could be less. Shared displays, is there another way of doing things so we don't have to measure different stuff? I mean, it's just a starting point for conversation. We would support the concept of a dedicated alcohol space. We would hope that certain characteristics of the store could qualify the entire liquor store as dedicated alcohol space. Okay. Okay, so the next steps, we're going to probably end it early, but I'll still open it up for some more dialogue before we conclude. But we're going to be collecting feedback. So whether it's in chat for today or on Thursday or after the session rules at lcb.wa.gov. We'll be taking comment on those and creating a file to make sure that we're capturing everything for consideration. We have internal project teams that we'll meet with and discuss a lot of the feedback to get different perspectives. And then, determine if a new draft language or a second round of stakeholder engagement is necessary. My guess is it's going to be necessary, but we generally just put that out as a general next step. I would fully anticipate having updated language, another round of stakeholder engagement before we ever introduce the proposed rules, if you will, under the CR 102. And that's really the formal point of proposing the rules. All of the interactions, the draft concepts prior to the CR 102 is all preliminary draft and informal type of rule development. And so definitely open to all of that type of feedback. So let me go and put in a couple of the links again. So if you're looking for the rulemaking activity, that was the link that I just put in there. And if you're looking specifically for the draft language, if you need a little bit more focused link, so we'll put that in. And then I don't think I have access to, well, maybe I do. No, not. So I'll put it in right before I close when I stop sharing the screen. I'll be able to capture those other links, and then, well, I guess it's right. I do have it right up here. Okay, let me just do this. And then I will put that here. So those are the links for those other documents. So all right, so that's really what I have. I'm happy to stay on and discuss issues or suggestions, ideas, questions. But that's what we have for you today. Again, this is really preliminary. Really appreciate everybody attending. I know it's a really busy time of year with session going on, so really appreciate your time in coming here. We just wanted to get this conversation started earlier. And then the other thing I wanted to point out in the draft, which certainly can be changed as well, depending on how long rulemaking takes. But we are planning for a delayed implementation. So once the rules would be finalized, typically they're implemented like 30 days after the CR 103 is filed, but we're talking about looking at January 1 of 2026. So there would be plenty of time for folks to be able to prepare for any type of regulation change. And again, if we end up doing a longer rulemaking project because of working through some of the input and interest points from a variety of different stakeholders, we can always push that time out a little bit as well. So we're really wanting to work with folks and appreciate all the feedback and interaction that we receive. So I'll conclude there. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand. I'll stay on for a little longer. But other than that, we'll conclude for the day. And again, if you want to attend Thursday, you can. It'll be the same presentation, or at least the same slide deck as today. We're not going to be making any changes to the draft language between now and then. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Crystal, I see your hand raised.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I had to wait to get put off mute. Just out of curiosity, are when do you anticipate the next meeting to occur after you receive feedback? Like, what is your timeline as far as needing feedback and potentially meeting with additional stakeholders?
So I will scroll up. If people are still watching the screen, it'll be quick. So
I'm
I'll
so
go to
sorry.
no, that's perfectly fine. So here's our timeline right now.
Okay.
And so tentatively, we're like mid to end of April would be round 2 of this informal stakeholder feedback. So after we get done this week, we're going to be meeting internally, trying to figure out, okay, what would the next draft look like? We would present that out and then have engagement sessions like this again in April. And so after that, we would take those comments and feedback and see if we could what we would be drafting and what type of interest can be met on those. And then the formal CR 102 would be tentatively filed mid to late May. And so that would mean once that happens, those are like the board saying, here are the actual proposed rules. Right now, it's all the conceptual draft rules as we're trying to develop these. And we'd like to get them to a point where we have a lot of agreement and consensus before we would put out the CR 102, because if we have to make major changes after that, we're going to have to back up the process a little bit. So we really want to have a full engagement prior to then to see if we can work out the issues that are being presented.
Thank you so much. Again, I said that earlier, but I really do appreciate that you guys are making this such a robust process. So I'll definitely be reaching out to you all. I hope you have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you so much for attending.